You know this isn't my fault.
All I had was a humiliating firing, overdue bills, and too much anger to keep my head down. That same night, I laughed at the millionaire no one dared to provoke and said the line all of Manhattan would never forget. Not my fault if your package is so small. Adrian Blackwell could have destroyed me for that taunt. Instead, he offered me 12 weeks by his side, enough money to save my life, and a contract too cold to look dangerous. I accepted thinking I still had control. Only too late would I understand that line hadn't just been a joke. It had been a trap, and the consequences would be impossible to undo. Hi, I'm Kay. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The Line No One Dared Say. The line no one dared say Dorian Pratt's office smelled of reheated coffee and cologne too expensive for the kind of man he was. I knew the scent by heart. I'd walk through that door 3 times a day for almost 2 years. What I didn't know was why he'd called me in at 2 in the afternoon on a late October Thursday, with no meeting on the calendar, no heads up, wearing the wide grin of a man who'd already decided something before I'd even sat down. "Maya, sweetheart, have a seat." I sat. Sweetheart was his trademark. He called every woman in the agency that, from the interns to accounting, and laughed like it was charm. It wasn't. I'd learned that the week before, when he'd brushed his hand against my waist in the hallway and said it was just office banter. Relax. I hadn't relaxed. I'd peeled his hand off me with 2 fingers, like flicking trash off a clean plate, and walked away without a word. Apparently, he'd been keeping score. "We need to talk about team culture," he said, leaning back, twirling a pen between his stubby fingers. "You've been heavy lately. People have been commenting." "What people?" "People, Maya. You know." "I don't. Name one." He laughed. The smile didn't reach his eyes. The AC hummed low in the ceiling, and I noticed the light from the window behind him had that yellowed tone of an afternoon already tired. "Look, I'll be straight with you. I don't think this place is working for you. You're young. There are other agencies. We're letting you go today. No drama." I went quiet for 2 seconds. Not because it hurt. Because I was doing the math. Overdue rent, electric bill, my mother's prescription, subway, ramen. The full arithmetic of my apartment in Astoria marched behind my eyes, and still I kept my chin where it was. "No drama," I repeated. "Sure, just one question, Dorian. Is this about the hallway?" His face closed by a millimeter. That was enough. He dropped the pen on the desk with a dry click. "Get your things, sweetheart." I stood up. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I walked out of his office the same way I'd walked in, on my own feet, and went to my desk to pick up the box of personal items that looked like it had been prepped by security before our conversation had even started. A beat-up notebook, my mother's mug, still with the lipstick mark on the rim, a flash drive, a photo I pretended I didn't see so I wouldn't fall apart in the elevator. Downstairs, I stepped onto a Manhattan sidewalk and the rain started. It wasn't a warning. It was a slap. 7 p.m. I'd already walked 30 blocks with the box pressed against my chest, hair plastered to my face, black dress clinging to me like a soaked second skin, horns blended with the sound of water drumming on cab hoods, and the smell of wet asphalt rose thick from every corner. I tossed the box into a dumpster near the curb after making sure the notebook was in my purse. I wasn't getting on the subway like that. I wasn't going back to Astoria like that. I wasn't opening the door of my apartment knowing the next thing I'd do was call my mother and lie that everything was fine. I glanced sideways. A discreet sign, gold over a dark background, Blackwell. One of those hotels where the doorman sizes you up head to toe before deciding whether to open the door. I was wearing the most soaked dress in the Northern Hemisphere, scuffed low heels, mascara running. I crossed the sidewalk and pushed through the revolving door before I could think. The doorman opened his mouth, closed it again. I think he saw the lifted chin and decided this wasn't his night. The bar was to the left of the lobby, walls paneled in dark wood, low lamps, and the kind of silence only old money buys. The air inside the room was warm, perfumed with cedar, and the faint trace of old tobacco soaked into the walls. I dripped across the thick carpet to the bar. I climbed onto a tall stool, the cold leather cutting through the soaked fabric. The bartender, flawless uniform, trained eye, didn't blink. "Good evening, ma'am. What can I get you?" "The most expensive drink you have." He held back a smile out of professionalism. "We have a menu. Surprise me." He poured me something amber in a glass that weighed more than my phone. I didn't ask the price. I wasn't going to. If the card got declined, I had 2 options: wash dishes or run. I'd decide later. I lifted the glass to my lips. The liquid burned on my tongue, sweet and warm, with a smoky finish that coiled in my throat. Hot, soaked, fired, 6 months behind on rent. I drank the most expensive sip of my life and closed my eyes for a second just to feel it. That's when I heard it. The table next to the bar, 2 steps behind me to the right. A woman's voice, refined, with that tone designed to be heard across the whole room without ever sounding too loud. No, darling, you don't understand. No one says no to a Blackwell. It's not a matter of wanting. It's a matter of physics. I laughed. It came out before I could think. A short laugh, loud, from the nose, the kind that escapes when the body is too tired to pretend. The bartender lifted his eyes from the glass he was polishing. The man wiping stemware in the back stopped. The low conversation at neighboring tables paused for half a second, and even the clink of ice in some distant glass seemed to hang in the air. And at the table next to me, behind me, someone turned their face. I felt it before I saw it. That shift in pressure in a room that happens when a person decides to look at you. I turned my head slowly, glass still in my hand, and met his eyes. Dark suit, impeccable cut, the kind that doesn't wrinkle even when the owner leans forward. White shirt unbuttoned at the collar. Dark hair combed back as if the rain outside didn't exist. One hand resting on the table beside an untouched glass of whiskey. Long fingers, a discreet watch glinting low in the lamplight. The other hand holding what looked like a phone, screen down, and the eyes, calm, still, the kind that don't blink. His gaze dropped from my face to my mouth, unhurried. Then it dropped further, found the collarbone, and slid 1 more millimeter, stopping at the neckline of the soaked dress, where the rain had drawn out everything that needed drawing out. There was no hurry. There was no disguise. I should have felt anger first. I felt it later. Before the anger, I felt heat. It crawled up the back of my neck like a closed fist, up the base of my spine, along the line of my jaw, as if he'd crossed the room on purpose and pressed his palm to me without leaving his seat. I tightened my fingers around the glass. The heavy crystal warmed against my rain-chilled skin, and I realized my breath had gone shallow, caught somewhere between my sternum and my throat. The woman in red kept talking behind me, something about contracts, about names, about physics, but her voice went muffled, like someone had closed a door between the 2 of us. I didn't take my eyes off his. He didn't take his eyes off my mouth. I thought about the firing, the rain, the rent, smiling Dorian, the sweetheart, the box of belongings in the dumpster. I thought about the beat-up notebook of dreams inside my purse, with the list that ended in "own an events company that doesn't treat me like a toy." I thought about my mother, who would ask if I'd eaten dinner when I called. I thought about every time someone had looked at me the way he was looking at me now, and used that look to make me smaller. Each of them came back in a blink, metallic taste at the back of my mouth, and I thought, not today. I turned the stool slowly until I was facing his table. The leather creaked low under my weight. I lifted the glass a little, to chest height, feeling the icy rim of the amber tremble against my fingers. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, that would wipe that absurd calm off his face, and when the air came out, it came out whole. Chapter 2. Then prove it. Not my fault if your package is so small. The line came out round, loud, exactly the size of a full Thursday of accumulated humiliation. The bar choked along with me. The bartender dropped the cloth onto the dark marble counter, and the fabric landed near a puddle of condensation no one had wiped yet. The woman in red, I caught it out of the corner of my eye, closed her mouth mid-word and locked her face, lipstick still wet in the low light. A couple in their 50s at a table in the back turned their whole necks like they'd heard the Lord's name in vain. A piano was playing slowly somewhere I couldn't see, and even so, I swore it had stopped for a measure, and the man in the dark suit, sitting at the table next to the bar, didn't move. For 2 seconds, he did nothing. I gripped the glass harder. The crystal was cold against my fingers, dense, heavy in a way cheap glass never is. I felt the blood rise in my ears, burning down to the roots of my wet hair. I thought, here it comes. This is when he calls the doorman. This is when I get thrown out of a 5-star hotel in a soaked dress with my name on some list of people who can never cross the revolving door again. Fine. I had nothing left to lose today. I'd already lost my job, my pride, and my last decent umbrella at the mouth of a subway station. Then he stood up, slowly, as if time were a luxury he bought by the hour. He pushed the chair back with one hand, Making no sound on the thick carpet, the other slid down his jacket, settling it on his shoulder in a short, mechanical gesture, the kind that belongs to someone who has dressed that way his entire life. He was taller than I'd calculated from sitting, broad shoulders under the cut of the suit, a contained walk, the kind that belongs to someone who doesn't have to be fast because the entire room is waiting for him. He crossed the 2 steps between his table and my stool without looking at anyone else. Not at the woman in red, not at the bartender, not at the couple in the back, only at me. His gaze was dark, fixed, sliding from my face down to my mouth like he was making a note of something. He stopped beside me. He didn't say anything for a second. He just leaned in, slowly. His right hand came to rest on the counter to my left, beside my glass. It was a large hand, long fingers, no ring, a slim watch peeking out from the cuff of the white shirt. His arm formed a line between my body and the rest of the bar, closing the angle, and for an instant the entire room disappeared behind that jacket. I caught his scent, before any word, something woody, dry, expensive, with no sweetness. Cedar at the base and an almost imperceptible trace of skin, warmed by the shirt. His mouth came close to my ear. Didn't touch. Just rested in the air of that space, enough for me to feel his warm breath against the skin of my neck, exactly where the dress had slid down a centimeter more because of the rain. Then prove it. That was all. 2 words. It came out low, rasped, unhurried, and slid down the nape of my neck as if he'd run a finger there. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. The glass stayed firm in my hand out of pure motor reflex, because inside me I'd forgotten every muscle that exists in the spine. I felt my heart beating in my ear, in my wrist, in some absurd point along the curve of my hip. He pulled back, slowly, and as he pulled back, the underside of his fingers brushed lightly against the small of my back, at the waist of the dress, just long enough for me to feel it, not long enough for me to react. A touch so brief I could have sworn I'd invented it, if the skin there hadn't stayed awake the rest of the night. He went back to his table, sat down, lifted the untouched glass of whiskey in my direction, 2 centimeters, like a toast, and took the first sip without ever taking his eyes off me. The low light caught the amber liquid and left the glass shining for an instant between his fingers. The bar started breathing again, slowly, around the 2 of us. The piano came back into existence. The couple in the back went back to whispering. Someone laughed nervously near the door. "Mr. Blackwell," the bartender said, in that low voice of someone confirming a bill. "The ladies' tab is—" "Put it on mine," he answered, without turning his head. I froze. Mr. Blackwell. The name climbed up in my head before I'd even made the full connection. Blackwell Hotels. The gold banner on the revolving door. The discreet thin sign on the facade I'd crossed soaked 20 minutes earlier without a second thought. The woman in red saying, "No one says no to a Blackwell," like it was a law of physics. I'd laughed at that line thinking it was an inside joke among rich people. It wasn't. It was him. The woman in red rose from the table behind me. Her heavy perfume shifted first, ahead of the muffled sound of quick steps across the carpet toward the exit. She passed by without looking at me, and her perfume, too sweet, hit my face before vanishing through the door. I turned slowly to the bartender. "I'm paying mine," I said. "Run the card." "Ma'am, Mr. Blackwell already." "Run the card." He looked at some point behind me. There was a tiny pause before he accepted the card, and for an instant I hated the fact that I'd needed his silent permission to pay for my own drink. The bartender ran my card. I closed my eyes for a second, hoping the machine wouldn't have mercy on me in the wrong way. It beeped. Approved. 4 times what I'd planned to spend on food that week. Fine. I'd asked for it myself. I signed the slip with a hand that was steady only on the surface. I put the card back in my purse. I climbed down from the stool with both scuffed heels at the same time, so I wouldn't trip. I walked to the door without turning my face. I felt his eyes following me across the whole carpet, from the stool to the rug at the entrance, from the rug to the glass of the revolving door. I didn't run. I didn't look back. Outside, the rain had slowed to a fine drizzle that landed on my face without wetting it. I took the subway in silence, leaning against the cold bar, with the dress still damp clinging to my thighs, the amber taste of the drink in my mouth, and the "then prove it" still scraping inside my ear canal as if he were leaning there. 3 flights of stairs up to my apartment, the usual smell of Indian food from the second-floor neighbor rising through the stairwell. Briar opened the door before I'd reached the top step. "You look like someone who saw God, or someone who saw the devil. Pick one." Briar Holloway, 28, bartender at night, illustrator in the morning. Best friend since I was 19. She was in animal print pajamas, a bottle of cheap wine in one hand, a bag of chips in the other, hair pinned up with a pencil. "Both," I said, and walked in. I told her about the firing, the sweetheart, Dorian, the box in the dumpster, the rain, the bar, the drink, the woman in red, the line, the man, the then prove it. Briar choked on her wine twice. She laughed with a mouthful of chips. She cried from laughing. Then she got serious. "Maya, don't." Maya, but was he hot? Briar, was he? Way too much. She let out a low whistle and threw herself back on the couch. The bag of chips balanced on her stomach. "Honey, I don't know if you just landed yourself a problem or a happily ever after. They both tend to wear dark suits." I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay there with the cracked ceiling above me, listening to the pipe from the upstairs neighbor make its usual metallic clanking, feeling the dress still hanging in the bathroom drip onto the ceramic tile, drop by drop. In an interval, I actually started counting, and every time I closed my eyes, it was his voice in my ear again. Not the word, the weight, the heat, the pause before prove. Friday went by in slow motion. So did Saturday. By Sunday, I'd already decided that was going to be an anecdote for the rest of my life. One absurd night I'd tell over again at a birthday party, 10 years from now, once the humiliation had turned into a funny story. Monday morning, 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it barefoot, in an old t-shirt, hair pinned in a crooked bun. A uniformed courier stood on the landing, gray cap, clipboard in hand. A rigid envelope, heavy paper, dark wax seal with an engraved initial I didn't have the nerve to look at up close at the door. He asked for a signature. I signed without understanding, with his pen that slipped on the plastic. I closed the door. I sat on the floor of the tiny kitchen with the envelope in my lap, the tile freezing the back of my thighs. I opened it. Temporary contract proposal. 12 weeks. Position: assistant coordinator for the launch of the new Blackwell Hotel in Tribeca. Clean professional clauses. Defined team. Named general manager. Deadlines. Deliverables. On the last page, before the signature line, the fee. I read the number. Read it again. Counted the zeros with my finger, like a kid learning decimal places. It was 6 months of back rent paid. It was my mother's bills current through the end of the year. It was the first installment of a savings cushion. It was the name of my dream spoken out loud for the first time. Inside the envelope, folded in 4, a smaller sheet, a note handwritten, black ink, firm letters, just 3 words. Then prove it, AB. I got up off the floor slowly, knees cracking. I walked to the little table in the corner, 3 steps across the cold floor. I opened the drawer. I took out the beat-up notebook of dreams, the one with the cover almost coming off, the elastic already loose from use, and set it beside the contract. Both things, side by side, on the scratched wood of the table. I looked at them. Chapter 3. Don't interfere with my work. The cab stopped at the right corner of the Upper East Side at 9 sharp on Wednesday morning. I paid the fare with the last card that wasn't yet maxed out, and got out gripping my portfolio like a weapon. The October air bit cold against the skin of my neck, with that specific smell of late fall Manhattan, burnt coffee from the corner stand, warm steam from the manhole, expensive perfume drifting off some coat that passed by too fast. Blackwell Hotel's headquarters took up an entire building of dark glass, and the doorman looked me up and down before checking the clipboard. My name was there. He opened the door without smiling. The lobby received me with the clean silence of places where money has lived for a long time. Cream marble floor, tall plants in black vases, and a discreet scent of cedar that seemed to have been chosen by someone who charged a lot for the choice. In the lobby, a dark-haired man in a gray suit was waiting for me near the elevator, a closed book under his arm and a leather envelope in his hand. Early 30s, low voice, the eyes of someone always about to make a joke no one's going to hear. Theron Vasquez, his lawyer, friend since college. You must be Maya. I must be. He smiled faintly, as if the answer had been a small test and I'd passed. He pressed the elevator button and let me in first. The cabin rose too fast for my stomach, with that instrumental music that pretends not to be music, and I looked at my own reflection in the bronze mirror and took one deep breath. Adrian's floor was the top one. His office had an entire wall of glass facing the park, an enormous dark wood desk, and no framed photos. No plants, no book outside the bookshelf, no forgotten glass. It was the office of a man who didn't want anyone guessing anything about him from what was on display. Adrian was standing near the window with his sleeves rolled up to the elbow, and when he saw me come in, the corner of his mouth lifted by 1,000th. I hated that, and wanted that in equal measure. Miss Collins. Mr. Blackwell. Theron coughed a laugh in his throat and pretended it was a clearing of the voice. The lady has an amendment, he said, pulling a pen from his lapel. I set the portfolio on the glass desk and opened the contract to the blank clause page they'd left for observations. The glass was cold under my palm, and I let the cold serve as an anchor. One non-negotiable clause, I said, looking at Adrian, not at the paper. You don't interfere with my work. You don't go over Idris's head. You don't change vendors behind my back. You don't send side messages to the team. If you have criticism, you bring it to me. If you have praise, the same. Adrian approached the desk slowly. He placed both hands on the glass top, and for a second I thought he was going to laugh. That's it? That's it. Sign it, Theron. Theron looked at him. You don't want to read it? I already read what mattered. Adrian took the pen from his friend's hand, opened to the back page, scrawled his signature on a line I hadn't even seen existed, and pushed the contract back to my side of the desk. Theron sighed, pressed a stamp into a corner, and stepped away toward the window with the book under his arm. But his glance lingered an extra second on his friend, the way you make a mental note of something strange to ask about later. When do I start? I asked. Today. Adrian opened a different folder. This one for me. Idris Marchetti, General Manager of the launch. He's expecting you on site at 2 p.m. Italian-American, efficient, writes everything in a leather notebook. Theron added without lifting his eyes from his book. You're going to like him more than you like us. I already like him more than I like you two. Adrian looked at my mouth when I finished the sentence. It was fast. It was a blink, but I saw it, and the heat crept up the inside of my collar as if someone had opened a warm window in the middle of fall. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. I treated Adrian like a client. I talked deadlines, vendors, press conference timing. I didn't call him sir after the first time, didn't look away from his eyes, didn't soften my tone when the subject demanded firmness. He answered at the same level. But every time I finished a sentence, his eyes dropped to my mouth and came back up. A minimal movement, trained, controlled. And every time, my neck heated, and I pretended it didn't. When I left, Theron walked me to the elevator. Can I give you an off-contract piece of advice? You can try. He never signs without reading. The elevator doors closed before I could decide if that had been a warning or a compliment. On Friday of the following week, 3 in the afternoon, the construction site of the Blackwell Hotel in Tribeca, borrowed white hard hat, reflective vest over a navy dress, 3-inch heels I insisted on wearing because they helped me meet Adrian's eyes without tilting my head. The site smelled of wet cement and fresh sawdust. There was the low, constant noise of a drill on some floor above, the clatter of scaffolding, the metallic smell of welding coming from a corner I couldn't see. The afternoon light came in through gaps in the tarps in white, sharp strips, and each strip marked fine dust suspended in the air. Idris had already introduced me to half the team and noted 3 things in his leather notebook that I'd asked to be changed before the end of the day. He was exactly what Theron had described, efficient, neutral, with a small smile reserved for when I got the name right of some vendor he'd thought I'd forget. Adrian showed up around 3:30, Theron behind him, and a hard hat in his hand. He didn't put it on. Idris pretended not to notice, but his pen paused for a second on the notebook before going on. Miss Collins. Adrian approached from the side, soundlessly. Can I borrow the coordinator for 10 minutes to show her the main hall? You can. Idris didn't look up from the notebook. If you bring her back in one piece. I laughed before I could swallow it. We crossed the site over the plank walkway laid above the still damp slab. There were cables strewn around, stacked buckets, electrical wires snaking from the wall like still snakes. Adrian walked slowly, 2 steps ahead of me, talking about the high ceilings, the marble that had come from Carrara, the chandelier that hadn't arrived yet. His voice filled the empty hall with that specific quality low voices have in big rooms. It sounded closer than it was. And the facade lighting? It's behind schedule. By how much? 2 weeks. Unacceptable. He turned his face toward me in the middle of the narrow corridor, and that was the moment my heel caught a cable hidden under the dust. It wasn't a fall. It was worse. It was that half slow-motion stumble where the body knows it's going down and still has time to protest. Adrian's hand closed around my elbow before I could process. Firm. Warm through the fabric. He pulled me toward the wall, away from the cable, and instead of letting go, he let his fingers slide down the inside of my arm, slowly, to my wrist. He stopped. His thumbs landed on the exact point where I could feel my own pulse beating too loud. You okay? His voice was low, lower than the noise of the site, lower than it needed to be. Yes. He took his time letting go. It wasn't long, 3 seconds, maybe 4. But 3 seconds with the palm of a man like that around your wrist is a different duration than 3 regular seconds. I felt the heat of his hand pass through the thin skin under the reflective vest, and for an instant, every other sound on the sight fell far away. When he pulled his hand back, the air between us thickened like still wet cement, and the exact place where his fingers had stopped stayed warm longer than it should have. I pretended to adjust my hard hat. The lighting. You were going to explain. I was. We started walking again. He talked normally about the budget, the Milan supplier, the deadline. I answered normally, but when we came around the hall and crossed paths with Idris again, he looked at my wrist for half a second, wrote something in the leather notebook, and said nothing. Tuesday of week 3, 10 p.m. Adrian's office at Blackwell HQ. The vendor spreadsheet had 140 rows and 3 formula errors I didn't find until close to 9 at night. Adrian had sent his team home at 8. Theron had left at 8:30 with a new book under his arm, and a discreet nod in my direction. It was just the two of us, and the glass tabletop between us. The city outside was a low constellation of lit windows, and the light over the park had gone out somewhere between the 7th and the 8th formula error. There was a cold coffee on my side of the desk, and another, still warm by the smell of it, on his. The AC had been switched off by some automatic system, and the silence of the entire floor was one of those silences that hum at the nape of your neck. I'd taken my heels off under the desk around 10. I was in black tights, bare feet on the cold rug, and it made an absurd difference in the overall state of my mood. Row 97, he said, without lifting his eyes from the screen. The formula's pulling from the wrong month. I know. I fixed it twice. It reverts on its own. It reverts because you didn't lock the cell. I'd lock the cell if the spreadsheet were mine, Mr. Blackwell. He lifted his face. The corner of his mouth went up that millimeter again. Miss Collins. What? You only call me sir when you're being difficult. I laughed. A short, involuntary laugh. The kind that escapes before the filter kicks in. Adrian lowered his voice when he answered, closer than I expected, from the other side of the glass top. I like it. 2 words. 2 words said at that volume, in that tone, at that time of night, with a glass tabletop between us that suddenly seemed too thin to serve as anything. I didn't know what to do with it, so I did the only thing that made sense. I leaned over the desk to point at row 97 on his screen, upside down. It's right here. Look. You have to lock the absolute reference with a $sign before the column letter. Adrian didn't look at the screen. I knew he wasn't looking at the screen because I felt his eyes somewhere between the open collar of my blouse and the base of my neck, on a triangle of skin I hadn't noticed was exposed until that second. His look had weight. That was the only way to describe it. A warm weight that slid down the skin without touching. I didn't straighten up. I kept pointing at the row, kept explaining. Adrian kept not looking at the screen. Adrian. I said his name out loud for the first time that night. The spreadsheet. His eyes rose slowly, met mine. There was no apology in them, no embarrassment, not the slightest movement to pretend he'd been looking somewhere else. It was the first time I was seeing Adrian Blackwell without his mask, and the mask was right there on the desk between us, tossed aside, waiting to be put back on when he decided. The spreadsheet, he repeated quietly. Row 97. Lock the reference. That's right. Maya. Yes. Did you lock it? I locked it. The computer chimed, marking the autosave, and the small sound cut the air like scissors. I stepped back from the desk and returned to my side of it. I slipped my heels back on under the desk without looking down, because looking down would have meant him seeing me look down, and I'd already given enough cues for one night. I gathered my bag. Adrian stood up at the same time. We walked together to the office door side by side, not saying anything. He opened the door for me. I brushed past him, my shoulder grazing his arm by accident, and felt the thin fabric of his shirt through the sleeve of my blouse for a fraction of a second. He stood there at the threshold. Good night, Miss Collins. Good night, Mr. Blackwell. I rode the elevator down alone. On the top floor, before the hall, I pulled the beat-up notebook of dreams out of the bottom of my bag, just to feel its weight in my hand, and discovered I was smiling for no reason. When the doors closed, I swore I saw, through the narrow gap, Adrian still standing in the doorway, not moving to the side I'd been on. Chapter 4. Headline. 3 weeks later, on the Thursday of week 6 of the contract, I left a business dinner at an exclusive restaurant on the ground floor of a Manhattan skyscraper with my stomach full of truffle risotto and my brain too full of Adrian Blackwell. It had been a 4-hour dinner with a group of Asian investors. The private room smelled of clarified butter, the new leather of the high-backed armchairs, and the woody perfume Adrian always wore, which I could recognize by now even with my eyes closed. The walls were paneled in dark wood, the light came from low lamps over the table, and the waiter moved with that trained lightness of someone who'd learned to circulate without being noticed. I pitched the launch concept 3 times, in 3 different levels of English, and Adrian watched me from the other side of the round table, as if I were the only interesting item on the menu. Every time I finished a sentence, his gaze dropped to my mouth a second longer than it should have, and came back to the investors unhurried, as if the interval between the 2 movements belonged to him. When the last investor finished his whiskey and stood up, Adrian stood up too, took my coat from the maitre d' before I could, and held it open for me. The fabric slid across my shoulders, and his fingers brushed lightly, the base of my neck when he adjusted the collar. It was a second. I felt the whole second. I can get a cab. You can, but my car is already out front. His car was a black sedan with a driver. The leather of the seats smelled new and cold, and the dashboard gave off a faint blue light that drew his profile from the side without showing the rest. I got in. He got in from the other side. At no point during the ride to Astoria did we talk about the dinner. We talked about the beat-up notebook of dreams, which he remembered from a half-conversation the week before, and about his surname, which he hated, and which he mentioned again without realizing. His voice got lower when the subject was himself, and firmer when the subject was me. I noticed, and I didn't comment. I filed it away. The driver stopped in front of my building. The street was empty. A siren was playing far away somewhere in Queens, and the fine rain that had started during dinner had turned into an almost invisible drizzle that held droplets on the car window. Adrian got out with me. I didn't ask him to. I'll walk you to the door. It's 5 meters. Then there'll be 5 meters. We climbed the 3 steps to the entryway. The hall light was dim, one of those yellowed ones that make everyone look prettier or more tired, depending on the hour. The floor was black and white mosaic, worn down in the middle by decades of tenants' footsteps, and the old hallway radiator was making that low metallic clicking I didn't even hear anymore. I took the key from my bag. Adrian didn't step back. He moved closer, slowly, with no warning, no posing, no trained half-smile. He just came closer until his mouth was a sigh from mine, and I felt, for the first time in my life, another person's breath hit my lips without the lips touching. His breath smelled of mint, and something warm under the mint, maybe the whiskey he'd had with dessert. I didn't close my eyes. He didn't either. His hand came up. I expected him to touch my mouth, my chin, anything. Instead, he picked up a strand of my hair that had slipped from behind my ear and put it back with the backs of his fingers. Slowly, the backs of his fingers slid down my jawline to the line of my neck. They stopped there. They pulled back. I swallowed dry, and he saw me swallow, and he didn't say anything. Good night, Maya. Good night, Adrian. He went down the 3 steps, got into the car. The car drove off. I stood there on the entryway until the sedan's lights turned the corner, and then I climbed the 3 flights of stairs in my building with my skin burning exactly where his mouth hadn't touched. I reached my floor and stood for a whole minute with the key paused in the lock, not turning it, not moving, listening to my own heartbeat in my ear. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or really the week after. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and stare at the ceiling and lie there deciding quietly to the darkness whether that had been a kiss or the absence of a kiss, and which of the 2 options was worse. The weeks turned into 5, then 6. The construction site turned into a finished hotel. The Milan chandelier finally went up to the double ceiling. Idris's team stopped calling me the new girl and started calling me the boss, and the eve of the launch arrived without warning me that it had arrived. Tuesday morning of the hotel launch in Tribeca. I went down at 7:30 in the morning to buy coffee on the corner because my coffee maker at home had decided to die on the worst possible day of the year. The January air bit at my face. The street smelled of wet leaves, of bread from the Lebanese bakery on the corner, and of the steam from the manhole that always vented at the 38th Street intersection. I'd thrown a gray overcoat over my pajama pants and was thinking I'd be back in 10 minutes. I was wrong. The newsstand sat between the coffee shop and the subway entrance. I always walked past without looking. That morning, I looked because the cover headline had a word it was impossible to ignore when it was your own name on the cover. Collins. And underneath, in smaller type, a sentence in quotes that I'd said in a bar 3 months earlier, soaked in rain and rage, thinking no one with a camera was listening. Not my fault if your package is so small. The gold digger who muscled into Millionaire Blackwell's life. The photo was mine, at the bar, from the angle of the next table over. Clingy dress, wet hair, glass raised, laughing. The angle was too low to be a phone left lying on the counter. It was the angle of someone trying to catch exactly that. I hadn't seen a single camera that night. I should have seen one. I picked up all 3 tabloids. The covers were almost identical. Same photo and slight variations on the lead, as if 3 different newsrooms had received the material in the same envelope. I paid. My hands didn't shake, and that surprised me. The man at the newsstand recognized me, hesitated, decided not to say anything. He just handed back my change carefully, the way you hand someone something fragile. I walked back to the building with the papers under my arm and the coffee forgotten on the corner. I sat on the entryway steps before going up. The stone was freezing under the overcoat. I opened the first one. Same photo. More text. A column signed by Celeste Wynne, and it was there, reading her name above a tiny photo in the corner of the page, that I recognized the elegant woman in red from the bar. The woman who had said, "No one says no to a Blackwell," before I laughed. The name didn't mean anything else to me beyond that, but something in the way the column chose its words made me think she knew Adrian in a way I didn't know him yet. I looked at her photo for a long second. The smile of someone who rehearses smiles in front of the mirror. Long neck, pearls. A woman who'd had the time to prepare all this with the calm of an afternoon tea. I read the whole text. It was precise. It was cruel. It was the work of someone who knew exactly where to press to make a woman seem like less than she is. Too pretty to be taken seriously. Hired to distract the air between mergers. A career born from a bar one-liner and the right volume in the neckline. Each adjective was chosen. Every comma knew what it was doing. I closed the paper and realized my jaw had been locked for a good 2 minutes. The phone rang. My mom. "Honey, I saw it. Are you okay?" "I am. Really? I am, Mom." There was a silence on her end. The silence of someone biting her lip not to say, "Come home." "Sunday lunch?" "Sunday lunch. Eat something before work." "Honey, I will." I hung up and the phone vibrated immediately. Briar, all caps. 3 back-to-back messages. "I'm coming over. Don't open the door for anyone who isn't me. I'm bringing wine and a hammer just in case." I let out a short, dry laugh. It was the only thing I'd heard come out of my body all morning that sounded like me. I climbed the 3 flights, took a shower, water too hot, steam fogging the mirror, deliberately not wiping the glass so I wouldn't have to look. Put on the black pantsuit I saved for days when I needed to remind myself I existed in full, pinned my hair up, put on the red lipstick of courage, the one I only wore when I needed to be who I wanted to be, not who I was being. Grabbed my bag, went down. I didn't run. Shh. On the sidewalk outside the Tribeca Hotel, at 9 sharp, there were more cameras than launch guests. The sky was low, the color of wet steel, and the wind whipped down the narrow street lifting the entry banners. I saw the crowd before the crowd saw me, and I had a second, exactly 1 second, where I considered turning around. I didn't. I crossed the sidewalk with my chin up, my heels striking the granite as if I were marking the rhythm of a march only I could hear. The microphones lunged forward, the lenses flashed in sequence, and each flash left a white dot floating in my vision for a second longer than it should have. The questions came in layers. "Maya, is it true you were hired as a companion?" "Maya, how long has the affair with Mr. Blackwell been going on?" "Maya, what does your mother think?" I stopped at the last one. I looked at the reporter, a man in his 40s, coat too good for a tabloid reporter, crooked tie. I smiled. I didn't answer. I started walking again. I passed through the hotel's revolving door, and the revolving door carried with me the silence I needed in order not to cry. In the lobby, the internal team was there. I recognized every face. I'd hired half of them. The white marble of the floor reflected the lights of the Milan chandelier, and every sound, the heel, the murmur, the chime of a spoon against a cup at the complimentary coffee bar, gained an extra echo it shouldn't have. I heard a giggle. It came from the check-in counter. 2 women I'd interviewed personally. One covered her mouth when she saw I'd heard. The other didn't. I noticed them both without needing to think about it. I noticed them the way you notice someone who'd decided, in that second, which side they were going to be on. Miss Collins. Idris. He'd appeared out of nowhere, leather notebook under his arm, and placed himself between me and the counter without making a scene. His suit jacket was impeccable, as always, and he had that neutral expression of someone who had already decided, somewhere between the headline and the lobby, which side he was on. "You don't need to be here today. I'll cover. Go home." I took a deep breath, looked at him, looked at the counter, looked at the double ceiling of the lobby with the Milan chandelier finally installed. That chandelier that had cost 3 meetings and 2 crises, and a whole night of spreadsheet work. It was beautiful. It was in the right place. I wanted to be there too. Thank you, Idris. But if I leave now, I never come back. And I didn't come this far in order to never come back. He gave that small, reserved smile, the one he only used when something truly pleased him, and he didn't want to let it show. Go. I'll cover you through the service corridor. I followed Idris down the service corridor behind the counter. The door closed. The noise of the lobby vanished at once, the way it does when you dip your head under bathwater. The walls in there were concrete painted light gray, the lighting cold, the air colder still. Climate control savings backstage. My heels made a different sound in there, more hollow, more honest. I reached the little room I'd been using as operational base, closed the door, pressed my forehead to it, and breathed for the first time that morning. The metal of the door was freezing against my skin. I let it stay freezing. The beat-up notebook of dreams was on the desk where I'd left it the night before. On the cover, I'd written a new line, in pen, before leaving the night before. Tomorrow is the day. I picked up the notebook, closed it, pressed it to my chest for a second, as if it were a child who needed to be protected from the noise outside. I went back to Astoria at lunchtime with my bag heavy from nothing. Briar was on my couch with $4 wine and the 3 tabloids spread open on the coffee table, and welcomed me the only way she knew how, by reading Celeste's column out loud with an exaggerated Baptist preacher accent, pausing dramatically on every adjective. A career born from a bar one-liner. Briar looked up over the paper. Babe, let me tell you something. If I could pick how to start a career, that's exactly how. A bar one-liner is the start of an anthem, not a scandal. I laughed. It was the first real laugh of the day. It came out a little broken at the end, but it came out. And the right volume in the neckline. Briar lowered the paper and raised her wineglass like she was taking a court oath. Okay, this is where I take it personally. Your neckline that night was at the minimum possible volume considering the dress was soaked. I swear under oath. Briar, now serious. Go. Briar set the paper aside, sat on the floor in front of me, took both my hands. Her hands were warm. Mine, I only realized in that moment, had been freezing since the newsstand. Do you want to leave? I thought about it. I really thought about it. I thought about the black pantsuit, the Courage lipstick, the Milan chandelier, the woman at the counter who didn't cover her mouth, Celeste and the pearls, and Adrian's hand stopped at my jaw 3 weeks earlier, and my mom asking for Sunday lunch without asking for anything else. I do. Okay, let's pack. The 2 of us went to the bedroom. I pulled the medium suitcase off the top of the closet, opened it on the bed, started folding blouses. Briar folded underneath, in silence, not joking for the first time all day. Her silence hurt more than the entire newspaper. A quiet Briar is a Briar taking something seriously. I stopped halfway through the 5th blouse. I let the fabric go, looked at the open suitcase, looked at Briar. I'm not leaving without looking him in the face. Briar closed her eyes, breathed, opened them. I knew it was going to come to that. How? Because you've never been a woman who leaves through the back door, Maya Collins. You're a woman who walks out the front door and slams it in the face of whoever shoved you. She pulled her Metro card out of her pajama pocket and threw it on top of the suitcase. Take it, cross the city, look him in the face, and then you decide whether you come back to pack or you go to work tomorrow like nothing happened. I grabbed the key, grabbed the coat, grabbed the bag, went down the 3 flights of stairs in one go, and the sound of my heels on the old wooden railing was the only sound in the whole building in the middle of that afternoon. On the sidewalk, before going down into the subway, I looked up at the gray January sky over Astoria and thought, quietly, just to myself, a line that had no audience and didn't need one. Now he looks at me back. Chapter 5. Courage of the Right Size. Blackwell headquarters took up a building of dark stone on the Upper East Side, with a bronze revolving door, and a lobby that smelled of expensive flowers even in winter. White lilies in tall crystal vases, arranged in symmetrical pairs along the pale marble, giving off that cold perfume only hotels and very wealthy companies manage to keep in the air. I walked across all of it with Briar's coat weighing on my shoulders and the key to her car gripped in my pocket. I felt the metal warm against my palm, warmer than it should have been, because I'd been gripping it for a long time. No one stopped me. The receptionist opened her mouth, but I'd already passed the counter before she'd decided what to say. Theron saw me in the 12th floor hallway. His shirt sleeve was rolled to the elbow, a folder under his arm, and the face of someone who'd already read 3 books before noon. He stopped, looked at my hand clenched on the strap of my bag, at my hair still half wet from the Manhattan streets, and gave a single discreet nod toward the double door at the end of the corridor. He's alone, he said, low. You're not going to announce me. I work for him, not for his protocol. I pushed the door open without knocking. Adrian was standing behind the desk, his back to the window. The view of Fifth Avenue was reduced to a gray strip behind him. the January sky pressing against the glass like wet lead. He'd taken off his jacket, tie loosened, right sleeve creased like he'd run his hand over it several times. When he saw me, he stopped breathing for a second. I saw it. I shut the door with my back. The click was too loud in the office. "Did you have anything to do with the leak?" I asked. No preamble. No greeting. No Mr. Blackwell, which I'd been using as armor for 12 weeks. He came around the desk slowly, but stopped before getting too close. He read distance like no one else. "No. Look at me when you answer." Adrian looked. Eyes still. No flicker. No second of calculation I'd already learned to recognize. "No, Maya. I didn't leak anything. I didn't authorize it. I didn't know." I waited. I counted 10 seconds on the wall clock behind him. Somewhere between the 5th and 6th second, I stopped hearing the clock and started hearing only my own blood rising. I looked for a lie somewhere in his jaw, in some movement of his mandible, in anything he might do with his hand. Nothing. Just a man standing still, letting himself be looked at, his chest rising in a rhythm too controlled to be natural. I believed him. And right there it was worse, because it meant I still had decisions to make. "Okay," I said. "I believe you." His shoulders dropped half a centimeter, in a movement I doubt he noticed in himself. "But I need to tell you something before you promise me anything," I went on. "I'm not going to be anyone's shield. Not yours, not Celeste's, not the press's. I'm not going to be the story that distracts from the problem. I'm not going to be the girl from the bar who got a contract just to become a footnote in a column." I walked to the edge of his desk, set my hand on the dark wood top, that wood that probably had a name in 3 languages. The surface was cool under my palm, smooth from thin wax, and for an instant I thought this was where he signed contracts that destroyed people. Now this was where I was bracing the weight of my body, so I wouldn't tremble. I've been supporting my mother since I was 16. I paid bills with tip money. I took care of my own dignity by myself for a long time before you existed in my life. I'm not losing it now, because someone decided laughing in a bar was a crime. Adrian didn't interrupt me once. He stayed still, with that stone face I'd started to understand. It wasn't coldness, it was restraint. He was holding something back. I saw it in the corner of his mouth, in that tense line that appeared only when he was deciding not to say something. "So, either you handle this properly," I finished, "or I walk out with whatever dignity I have left. And I'd rather walk out today than be dragged out tomorrow." The silence that came was thick. Outside, a thin chorus of car horns cut through the glass and died. On some floor below ours, a door shut. Adrian came halfway around and stopped in front of me, with the desk still between us, but with his breathing inside the field of mine. I caught the discreet scent of his soap, something of cedar and salt, mixed with the coffee forgotten in a cup at the end of the desk. "I'm going to answer," he said low. "How?" he thought. It wasn't a long thought. It was the thought of someone who had already decided, but needed that final second to find the courage to say it. The only way that still hurts. I understood before he explained. Breyer had told me, years ago, the tabloid summary of what they'd done to him. An ex who'd opened up his private life in a society column, and after which he'd sworn never to offer his face to a camera again. And I knew, looking at him now, that he was about to break the one rule that kept him on his feet. I felt something tighten in my chest that I didn't want to name there, in front of him, in front of myself. I didn't say thank you. That wasn't the register. I just nodded once, picked up my bag from the desktop, and turned to the door. Before I opened it, I stopped. "Adrian, yes, if you do this out of guilt, I'm going to notice. It's not guilt. Then what is it?" He took a moment. The clock ticked 3 times in the gap. "It's the first thing I'm doing by choice in 10 years. I walked out. Theron was leaning against the hallway wall, pretending to read an agenda. He straightened up when he saw me. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm okay." He nodded, and believed me. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for me all day. At 6 p.m., the lobby of the Blackwell Hotel in Tribeca still had journalists. Not as many as in the morning, but enough. I stayed in the support room on the 2nd floor, with Idris beside me and the internal TV monitor on the channel with the sound muted. The room smelled of reheated coffee and new carpet. Idris didn't write anything in the leather notebook this time. He just held the pen still between his fingers, and I noticed he was gripping the cap hard enough to leave a mark on the tip of his thumb. Adrian appeared in frame, Theron 1 step behind him, on the left. No podium, no notes. Just the lobby's pale marble floor and the wall with the brand logo behind. The cameras adjusted. Someone asked for quiet. Someone lowered a microphone. Idris turned the sound on. "Good evening," Adrian said, and his voice came out lower than I expected. Not the businessman's voice. The voice I'd heard against my ear at the bar, without the venom. I didn't prepare a statement. I preferred to come here without one. Pause. A flash burst. He didn't blink. 10 years ago, someone I was sleeping with decided my private life was column material. I survived it by building an unattackable image. I learned to read cameras. I learned to calculate every sentence. I learned not to respond. It worked. For a decade, it worked. Another flash. Idris gripped the edge of the table. Today, 3 tabloids ran the face of a woman who works with me and called her things she is not. They used a line taken out of context. They used stolen photos. They planted a story they knew was a lie, and they did it to hurt me through her. It didn't work. I'm going to explain why. He looked directly at the lens. I held my breath along with the room. Maya Collins is not a distraction. She is not a scandal. She is not a joke. She is the assistant coordinator of this hotel's launch. She is the best professional I have hired in 5 years. And she is the only person in a decade who walked into my office, looked me in the face, and demanded I do the right thing instead of asking for favors. I owe it to her to listen. The entire support room turned toward me. I didn't take my eyes off the screen. I felt heat rise from my neck to my face and pretended it was from the coffee I wasn't drinking. As for who built this story, Adrian went on, I know the name. You will know it within 24 hours. For now, I'll leave you with one observation. The only small thing in this story is the courage of someone who tries to destroy a woman in order to get to a man. Good evening. He walked out of frame without taking questions. Idris muted the screen. A silence fell inside the support room that was different from the silence in the office. This silence had respect in it. Miss Collins, Idris said low, I've worked in hospitality for 22 years. I've never seen a Blackwell come down from a floor to defend someone. I didn't know what to say. I clutched the beat-up notebook inside my bag, from outside the fabric, just to feel that it was still there. I felt the worn leather edges, the folded corner of the cover, and for an instant, I thought I was going to cry in front of the operational manager of a 5-star hotel, which would have been catastrophic. I wasn't expecting it either, I said. Wednesday morning, 11 a.m., conference room at Blackwell headquarters, on Adrian's office floor, long smoked glass table, cold to the touch, reflecting the recessed ceiling lights and white patches. Adrian at the head, no jacket. Theron to his right, with the folder. Me on the left, with Idris beside me. 2 more lawyers I didn't know, in identical dark suits, and a man from digital security with an open laptop and the red eyes of someone who hadn't slept. Theron started. Dry voice. Pauses between sentences. In 24 hours, we identified the trail. Messages exchanged with a reporter at the 3 tabloids that ran the material. Payment traced through an intermediary transfer. Exact sequence. The photo and the quote came off an internal hotel phone in Tribeca, copied during the press credentialing last Thursday. The phone belongs to an outsourced employee. The employee was paid. He turned the laptop in my direction. The screen rotated slowly over the glass. I saw the name of the payment recipient. I saw the reference. I saw the signature. Celeste Wynn, I said quietly. Celeste Wynn, Theron confirmed. I didn't allow myself the luxury of celebrating. I looked at Adrian. He was looking at the table, and instead of demanding a look back from him, I silently thanked the fact that he wasn't looking, because if he had looked at me in that second, I don't know what my face would have done. Miss Collins's contract remains in place, Theron went on. The launch happens tomorrow, as planned. The official statement goes out in an hour. The outsourced employee has already been terminated. The case stays open against Ms. Wynn, handled by an outside team we'll be retaining this afternoon. Idris asked to speak. It was fast. He looked at me, not at Adrian. If the lady accepts, I'd like you to take over as head coordinator for the next phase of the launch. Not as a kindness, as a technical decision. I swallowed dry. The beat-up notebook weighed inside the inner pocket of my bag like it was full of bricks. I accept. Adrian lifted his head. He didn't smile. That wasn't the room for it. But his breathing eased a little, and I saw it. When the meeting ended, everyone left in a line. The lawyers first, then the laptop man, then Idris with a discreet nod in my direction. Theron was the last to walk through the door, and as he passed, he touched Adrian's shoulder lightly, the way you check in on a brother still standing after a bad night. I gathered my papers slowly on purpose, lining up the edges twice, organizing a folder that was already organized. Adrian waited for the footsteps to fade down the hallway. Maya, I lifted my eyes. I need to tell you something in private, he said. Tonight, not at the hotel, not at the office. Where? He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white for an instant. At my place. I closed the folder calmly and put it under my arm. I felt my heart beat 3 times louder than it needed to before I answered. 9 p.m., I said. He nodded. I crossed the room, opened the door, and paused at the threshold on purpose for a second, without turning around, just to let him hear the tick of my heel on the floor before it disappeared. Chapter 6. The door that closed slowly. The private elevator went up in silence. It was one of those silences with no ambient music, no floor announcement, nothing, just the faint hum of the cable, and my own breath returned to me by the smoked glass. 9 sharp. I'd timed it on purpose. I'd arrived in the lobby at 8:55 and stood on the Upper East Side sidewalk, counting until the clock hit the full hour. I didn't want to walk in either too early or too late. The door opened straight into the penthouse. I'd never come up alone. It had always been on the ride of one of his sentences, an official invitation, a car sent for me. Now it was just me, with the key he'd sent over to the office that afternoon, inside an envelope without a note. The key was small, silver, with a smooth ring. It fit in my coat pocket like it had always lived there. The penthouse smelled of clean wood and some soft citrus thing I'd never been able to identify. The view of Manhattan spread out behind the floor-to-ceiling glass, an entire city flickering down below, indifferent. Adrian was standing with his back to the door, in front of the glass with a half-full glass in his hand. No jacket, no tie. White shirt loose at the collar, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He didn't turn when the elevator opened. "You came," he said. That was an observation, not a question. I said I would. I walked to the middle of the room. I stopped far enough away to be able to see his face from the side when he finally turned. I took off my coat and folded it over my arm, without handing it to the housekeeper who appeared in the kitchen doorway, and whom he dismissed with a single wordless gesture. Adrian turned slowly. I saw again what I'd seen that afternoon in the conference room. Not the heir, not the man of the columns, not the one who crossed the bar to press his mouth to my ear. A tired man. The kind of tired that lives behind the cheekbone. "I don't know how to start," he said. "Start where it hurts." He laughed without sound. A short, defeated, almost beautiful laugh. "I didn't say what I wanted to say at the press conference. I know. You know? Adrian, I watched you talk to a camera for 10 minutes. You spent the whole time talking to the camera. I was waiting for what was for me." He set the glass down on the sideboard, walked 3 steps in my direction and stopped. He didn't come close. He measured, the way he always measured. "You were the first person in a decade," he said. "I chose to defend instead of defending myself. I waited. I knew there was more. I spent 10 years calculating every camera, every interview, every gesture. I turned myself into an image so no one could ever hurt me again. It worked so well that I forgot what it was like to be a man with a first name." He swallowed. "And then you laughed at me in a bar." "I didn't plan it either." "I know you didn't." Another silence. Outside, a helicopter passed high and disappeared toward the river. "I don't want to be defended," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I want to be chosen." He looked at me a second longer than was comfortable. "I already chose you at the bar," he said quietly. "I just didn't know it yet." And the air changed. I can't explain it any other way. It wasn't a metaphor. It was physical. It was as if someone had pressed a button that dropped the room's pressure half a degree and made every breath a little deeper. I felt my shoulder drop. I felt the beat-up notebook weighing inside the bag I still hadn't set on the floor. I felt my own fingers opening against the fabric of the folded coat. Adrian closed the distance. He didn't run. He didn't cross the room. He walked. 3 long steps, a minimal adjustment of the chin, and his eyes locked on mine the whole way. When he reached me, he held my face with both hands, fingers on the jaw, thumbs resting near the corner of my mouth. He held gently, as if I would vanish if he pressed too hard. "May I?" he asked. I didn't answer with a word. I lifted my chin by a centimeter. He kissed me. It wasn't the almost kiss, the one at the entryway in Astoria. It wasn't the breath that stops a sigh from my mouth. It was a full kiss, deep, without calculation. His mouth found mine the way you find something you lost a long time ago. I caught the faint taste of what he'd been drinking, a hint of something bitter, good, and underneath the taste of him, which I didn't know I'd recognize in the first second, and I did. I grabbed his shirt, not from a desire to pull, from the fear of stumbling backward. My legs had decided not to work with their usual competence. His fingers slid down from my face to the nape of my neck, and there he lingered, his thumbs tracing a slow circle on the bone behind my ear. I let out a sound against his mouth that I swear I hadn't authorized. "Maya," he murmured. "Don't talk." He laughed low, inside the kiss. His fingers traveled down my back, down my spine, and stopped at the base, flat-palmed, firm, as if he were learning the shape. His forehead pressed against mine for a second, before his mouth went back to mine, and he murmured something I couldn't quite hear, because the blood was rushing too loud in my head. Maybe it was my name. Maybe it was something else. I never knew. When he pulled back a centimeter to look at my face, I saw what no one had seen. Adrian Blackwell with lost eyes. No calculation. No armor. The man of stone with a crack down the middle of his chest that ran all the way to the floor. I grabbed his tie. It had been loose since before I arrived. I wrapped it once around my wrist. "Come on," I said. "Where?" "You know." I pulled by the tie. He came. We crossed the living room slowly, me walking backward, him a step behind, his mouth meeting mine twice more along the way, once near the sideboard, once in a hallway I didn't know yet. The bedroom door was ajar. I pushed it open with my shoulder. Adrian stopped at the threshold. He looked at me like he was still giving me the chance to change my mind. I held his gaze. I let go of the tie. He closed the door behind us. 7 a.m. The bedroom had November light coming in through the floor-to-ceiling glass. Clean, cold light of a city that hadn't really woken up yet. I woke up before him. It was the first time I'd ever woken up before a man in my life. I was always the one who slept in. Adrian was sleeping on his side, hand open on the sheet between us, as if he'd extended it during the night and not found anything. I looked at the curve of his shoulders, the shadow of his lowered lashes, the way his mouth relaxed in sleep and lost all the precision of his photos. It was a different face from the press conference face. It was a face I didn't know yet. I slipped out of bed carefully. I picked up the white shirt from the floor, where it had fallen the night before, in a spot I wasn't going to detail even to myself, and put it on. The sleeves were too long. The buttons stopped at mid-thigh. I didn't even bother to button it up from the top. The marble kitchen was quiet. The coffee machine recognized his touch, but I'd seen Adrian punch the sequence several times over the past few weeks. I got it right on the second try. The smell of coffee filled the room before the liquid hit the cup. Adrian appeared in the kitchen doorway in pajama pants slung loose at the hips, and no shirt. He stopped at the threshold, didn't say anything for a second. "You're wearing my shirt," he said. "I am. I'm never going to be able to wear that shirt again. You have 30 just like it. Not just like it." I laughed. He walked across the kitchen barefoot and stopped behind me. He didn't hug me right away. He stood there half a second just looking at the bare shoulder that had slipped out of the loose neckline. Feeling someone look at a specific curve of your body in silence is something no one prepares you for. Then he pressed his lips there. Just once. Unhurried. I poured 2 cups. I pushed one toward him. We sat at the high stool of the marble counter, side by side, with the city waking up on the other side of the glass. His phone was on the counter too, face down, on silent, but I saw the light flash through the brightness it made on the pale marble. Theron, probably. Adrian slid the phone with one finger farther away, without turning it over. "Are you ignoring him?" I asked. Today, yes. My own phone vibrated in my bag, near the shoe I'd kicked off in the entryway. I stretched my arm out, grabbed the phone. A voice memo from Breyer. I played it at low volume, leaning into his shoulder. "Babe," Breyer's voice came out hoarse with early morning. "If you don't come home tonight, I get it. But eat something. I swear to you rich men have weird food at home. Find something normal. And don't return my car key with low gas." I choked on a laugh. Adrian looked over sideways, with that dry half smile only a few people saw, and that made me laugh more. "Breyer? Breyer. I like her. She hasn't decided if she likes you yet." "Fair." 7:45. I got down from the stool. I grabbed the skirt from the day before. Breyer had forced me to keep one spare in my bag as an adult precaution, and this was the first time I was silently thanking her. I put it on in the bedroom, without closing the door, with Adrian leaning on the kitchen doorframe watching like he was learning something new about a subject he already had down. I came back to the kitchen in heels, coat over my arm, bag on my shoulder. "Head coordinator," he said. "Head coordinator. Don't be late. You don't interfere with my work. The clause stands." "I know." He crossed the kitchen, held my face again, with both hands, the way he had the night before but without the tremor, kissed me at the door, unhurried, like he was learning to say goodbye for the first time in his life. His phone vibrated on the counter. Again. It wasn't the discreet glow of silent mode. It was the full vibration of the device against the marble, a dry buzz of an incoming call. Adrian turned his head a millimeter. I looked over his shoulder. The screen lit up. No saved name, just a number, an area code I didn't recognize. Adrian reached out a hand without letting go of my face, flipped the phone over, and went back to looking at me like nothing had happened. "I'll check it later," he said. "Okay." He kissed my forehead, squeezed my left wrist lightly. I headed toward the elevator. The mirrored door opened silently. I stepped in. I pressed the ground floor. I smiled at my reflection. with the mark of his mouth still slightly swollen on me, and the white shirt folded in the tote inside my bag, because I hadn't managed to give it back. The ride down was long. I thought about the 3 short trips he'd taken over the last 6 weeks. I thought about that phone call he'd answered with his back to me in the office hallway, voice low. I thought about the night he'd shown up at the Astoria apartment at 2 a.m. with no detailed explanation, only saying, "I'll tell you later," and then never telling me, because I hadn't asked either. I thought about the no-name number on the marble counter. The elevator stopped at the ground floor. The doors opened to the lobby paneled in dark wood and pale marble. I gave a single, slow shake of my head, smiled at the doorman who greeted me by name, he already knew my name, and stepped out into the Manhattan street. There was a thin wind. It was Thursday. The contract was still on. The launch was still on. I had work to do, and that no-name number on the marble kept flashing behind my eyes for the entire block. Hey, Kay here. That's it for book 1, but guess what? Book 2 is already done. You can grab access to it for just a small fee. All I had was a piece too beautiful to trust, until I got photos of Adrian Blackwell leaving a hotel with another woman, on the very same night he swore he was in Boston, his hand on her waist. The same restrained smile he saved only for me. He said it was a setup. He said he didn't know that woman. He said it was all nothing but a poorly staged lie. But the evidence was too perfect, and I already knew well the taste of loving something good seconds before watching it turn into pain. So I pulled away, because I needed answers. Only maybe, when the truth comes out, the betrayal won't be the worst of it. Maybe the worst part will be realizing he never had to lie, because I was always exactly where he had planned for me to be. And now, someone is watching me far too closely to be a coincidence, and too closely to be only him. I was in danger. Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to catch the upcoming ones, look for Kay's Sweet Love on YouTube for the best billionaire and CEO romance content. Remember, the official channels are Kay's Sweet Love on YouTube and the My Stories platform. I'll be waiting for you there. With love, Kay. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book 2, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.